Hi guys, it's Silas for Kit Guru, and today we are taking a look at the HyperX Pulsefire Surge RGB mouse. So let's start with the basics. The Pulsefire Surge RGB boasts not only pinpoint precision, but for $70 or about $59.99 in the UK, you also get spectacular lighting effects and a 2-year warranty, which probably won't cover throwing it at the screen, but it's nice to see HyperX's confidence and to know that you're covered in case of issues. In the box we find the mouse itself and a number of documents, including a quick start guide, and that's kind of it. It would have been nice to see a couple of replacement feet just in case. On a side note, kudos for the somewhat cool packaging. Not premium, but seems very intentional how each piece integrates and reinforces the next. It feels like somebody really took their time to design this, so it's worth a mention. When first holding the mouse, it's impressive how solid the mouse feels for its smaller profile and size. The plastic construction doesn't feel cheap and there is no give when you squeeze it. The moderate weight at 100 grams for the mouse alone and smaller size has the Pulsefire Surge feeling almost like a smooth pebble. It's quite pleasing to the touch. Materials are also interesting. You have a smoother, soft touch plastic for the top panel of the mouse, with slightly more granular plastic for the right and left sides. It's a very subtle change, but the added texture on the sides makes for a better grip if you tend to lift your mouse a lot. But the core contact point for your fingers being a little softer adds to the comfort. Equally, I tend to have somewhat clammier hands, which is constantly pointed out by those who impolitely decide to take over my mouse control, kind of over my shoulder. Normally this is just met with hand retraction, but even after longer periods of use, the Pulsefire Surge still felt soft rather than slippy and looked unused. You have smaller forward and backwards buttons on the left hand side in a glossy black plastic and a single as standard DPI switch at the top sitting behind the rubberized scroll wheel. The scroll wheel feels really solid with quick clicks up and down and limited travel in between increases and decreases. Each movement feels intentional without any sponginess, but it's not so rock solid that you can't quickly scroll through web pages. For the left and right clicks, both feel solid and immediate, and it's nice to see that on-run switches are here, good for a solid 50 million clicks. On the base of the mouse you find massive front and back feet, which are both really slippy for easy skating around your mousepad, and the Pixar PMW3389 sensor, which boasts resolutions of up to 16,000 dpi. The USB 2.0 cable is braided as well, which is nice to see, but I found the tighter braid with the firmer inner cable meant that although tangle-free, the cable wasn't really loose. It did tend to take on a shape and stay that way rather than being soft and malleable. It is worth noting that this will likely loosen over time though. One element I felt had been a potential miss is the lack of left-handed use. The mouse follows a relatively symmetrical design and it would have been nice to see forward and backward buttons on the right as well to enable this ambidextrous use. Of course I appreciate more switches means a higher cost, but for me extra buttons means a higher level of customization, which would have also been very cool. This is also somewhat the case for the DPI switch. You only have the option of cycling up in values with no dual switch. There is no option to move quickly down. Personally, I tend to remap the DPI switches for volume up and down when in non-gaming use, and it was a bit of a shame not to have this option with the Pulsefire Surge. On the desk, it's immediately apparent that this mouse will find it hard to please someone who has bigger hands and prefers a palm grip. I don't have massive hands, but rather longer skeletal fingers, and normally with my Gigabyte XM300 my hand sits very naturally across the body and I'm easily able to reach both mouse clicks with my palm resting comfortably on the back of the body. Immediately when grabbing the Pulsefire Surge it became obvious that it wasn't suited to my hand size. I could palm grip it, but my fingers easily overextended the right and left clicks, and this also resulted in my thumb being misaligned from the forwards and backwards buttons, with quite a stretch required to reach them. This mouse is far more suited to a finger-only grip unless you have smaller hands. But rather than finding this too foreign considering my preferences and longer fingers, I actually quite like the slightly weightier, denser nature when using in this grip. It became really easy to maneuver or quickly pass from finger to finger, and the weight adds a little bit more to the mouse's momentum when you get it going, allowing for much quicker and sharper movements. Not necessarily more accurate, but I found even with a higher DPI across my dual monitor setup that I could quickly move from one screen to another with just small movements of my fingers rather than swinging my whole hand around. On to performance. The Pulsefire Surge is rock solid in this respect. As mentioned before, the sensor of choice is the Pixar PMW3389, which works incredibly well. I had no issues with the responsiveness even on different surfaces, and my cursor or crosshair seems to always be on point. I have played with poorer tracking mice in the past, jumping around the screen super noticeably or even just enough to deviate from a headshot, and with the Pulsefire Surge, there was none of this. In gaming, although you can jump all the way to 16,000 DPI, I tended to flick between some of the presets, 1600 and 3200 DPI. It is nice to see that there is some flexibility with increments of 50 DPI up and down, and this is all programmable through the software. Although I have been spending some time on Davinci Original Sin 2, the Surge really came alive in FPS titles, and it proved a clear winner in Overwatch and PUBG. From a productivity standpoint, I would personally stick with a slightly larger, more hand-restable mouse, but the smaller size and super smooth feet made significantly more sense in faster paced games, allowing me to cover much greater distances on my mouse pad with much less delay. Both the right and left clicks also felt really responsive and precise, leaving me in no doubt that when missing catastrophically, it was purely down to my poor abilities than underperforming peripherals. Moving into software, there are a host of options for adjusting performance things. Within key assignment, you have the option of customizing each of the mouse buttons with a range of different commands, either keyboard, Windows, or multimedia functions, and even opening specific applications or files, which is kind of interesting. There is also super easy to reach options for switching your left and right clicks, again suggesting this mouse would be a great option for left-handed use if you're willing to forego the forward and backwards buttons. The performance options allow customization and colorization of DPI adjustments, and as the Pulsefire Surge only offers a single button for DPI adjustments, it's nice that you can simplify these options if you prefer only a couple, rather than clicking through a full 5 levels. If you do decide to go for the full 5 levels of adjustment, the lighting assignment of each value also temporarily flashes across the mouse before it returns to its predefined lighting option, so you can actually receive a colour indication of which DPI option you've selected, which is actually a really nice touch. As you would expect from a gaming mouse, macros are also possible, and also what's really nice to see is inbuilt storage for up to 3 profiles, so if you prefer to travel with your mouse, you can back up a number of different preferences and take them with you. It's also cool to see that you can flip between these profiles using a combination of the DPI and mouse wheel click on the fly, and even adjusting lighting brightness with the same DPI button and forward and backward buttons on the mouse. Moving on to the lighting, the RGB in the name suggests some strong customization options for the mouse appearance, and initially I will say I really like how the RGB illumination has been applied. The single LED strip wrapped around the mouse is one of the classier implementations I have seen, and the addition of the illuminated HyperX logo is also a welcome inclusion. When booting up the software, you are greeted with a relatively plain interface, and initially it was a little bit tricky from the outset to make my customizations. I elected not to mess with the default and keep that standard, but to actually start making real changes, you have to make and save a new profile and then hit customize. Lighting has loads of options for either solid single colour, wave, colour cycle, breathing and trigger modes. Even with these modes you can enable selections of colours, the direction of movement around the mouse, and the speed as well. It's also nice to see that you can adjust your colours using RGB numerical if you are working towards something very specific. If you decide to jump into the advanced mode, you are greeted with individual LED assignment, which suddenly becomes pretty intense. You can pick specific colours for each LED around the mouse, and options for the logo as well. It's nice to see so much flexibility in software for even a mouse, and shows that adding the RGB functionality has been well thought through, rather than just being chucked on to join the crowd. Overall, I was left really impressed. The Pulsefire Surge's build quality is excellent, and it feels really solid, and nicer touches like the braided cable and slight even variances in materials for better grip definitely has the more premium feel. I like that the RGB implementation was well thought through, and customizations through the HyperX Ingenuity software works really well as well. It never felt buggy or rushed, leaving me feeling that this had always been intentional rather than just an afterthought to join the current hordes of other RGB peripherals available. In gaming, it couldn't be faulted. Although not the best option for say like MMOs, the weight and smaller size allowed for super speedy movements in FPSs, and although I found there was a small learning curve due to my preference of grip, this is relatively subjective, and I'm sure those who take their gaming a little bit more seriously would have no problems adjusting. So in summary, the HyperX Pulsefire Surge RGB is on the surface and in the hand a stripped out seemingly basic gaming mouse that is backed up by actually great software and good looking lights. For those looking to up their competitive game and for the price, it is definitely worth a look. Make sure you like this video if you liked it, and don't forget to hit subscribe for future videos. If you don't want to miss the next video, feel free to click the bell icon for notifications of new video releases from Kit Guru.